Greetings, my name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Callie McLaughlin.
And we are the Dungeon Dudes. And today we're going to ask the question, does the 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide fix encounter building?
Encounter building in the 2014 DMG was a mess, and there is a common saying out there that the monster CR is broken. So the big question, does 2024 fix that? Do they do it better? And are they still missing some pieces? There's a lot to discuss today, so let's get rolling.
So, a bit of a caveat to start off with. We haven't seen the new monster manual yet.
That is important because the monster manual is actually going to be the final touch to determine whether or not everything works.
Yes. And so we don't know if challenge rating is still broken or not. However, we have seen some previews from the new monster manual of some of the monsters. There was the preview adventure that was published on D&D Beyond that had a couple stat blocks that were tester. We've seen previews of both the Kuotoa as well as the Ancient Green Dragon. And we've got a couple stat blocks, like low-level monster stat blocks in the player's handbook. So we're kind of basing our information on these sort of guesstimates.
I will also say that Monty and I did have the pleasure of talking to some people from Wizards of the Coast at the cons that we went to this year, and we did ask about monsters, and the whispers seem to be that they are planning to be more robust and be able to dish out a bit more damage as well. So the expectation on the monster manual is that we are going to see better monsters in it.
Yeah, so previously when it came to building encounters in 2014, the way that the rules worked was pretty obscure. You essentially had this matchup sort of set of rules that you would have to also spend a multiplier if you were using multiple monsters in the encounter. Xanathar's Guide to Everything came around with a more quick monster matchup table, a rejigging of how to use these encounter building rules that was a little bit more intuitive. I really liked the Xanathar's quick matchup table. It worked pretty well.
Compared to what we got in 2014, Xanathar's felt like a godsend.
Yeah.
I will still say, and if you're anything like me, especially if you're a newer DM, trying to use the system that was presented in the 2014 rules and even the one presented in Xanathar's, you ended up with your players destroying every single combat encounter. It took me about a year to really start to realize that I'm just going to throw deadly encounters at my players and they're still going to win without taking a scratch like 60% of the time.
Yeah.
So I really had to tune up everything from anything that was presented. And that's almost like, it felt bad that that's a lesson that every DM had to learn, to say, oh, according to this, I should throw 3 goblins at my players. So I'm going to throw 5 goblins, a goblin chief, and a bugbear, and that will actually be okay.
Yeah, and so the interesting change here is that in the 2014 rules, you actually did have an XP budget, but the biggest limitation of that XP budget was that whenever you used multiple monsters, it applied a multiplier. So if you did a combat with 2 monsters, like, it immediately, like, spent your budget.
Yeah.
You were done. What ended up happening was that a lot of dungeon masters would do this thing where they would run deadly encounters and their players would still trounce them. Now, a big issue with that, and I think that this is a general trend, is that the 2014 Dungeon Master's Guide recommended 6 to 8 encounters per adventuring day. It didn't clearly define what those encounters were, so there was a lot of argument over, is an encounter a social encounter where the players don't spend resources, or does it actually expect us to do 6 to 8 combat encounters in an adventuring day in order to challenge the party based on basically attrition-based challenges?
And I rarely get 6 to 8 combat encounters in a day. Usually I try to have a session be about a day, and usually I'm averaging 3 maybe
Yeah.
4.
And so the issue that I think a lot of GMs ran into was that you would have like a single combat encounter or two, and the player characters who were supposed to stretch their resources over 6 to 8 encounters were spending 6 to 8 encounters worth of resources on 2 or 3 encounters and blowing up the world. Because characters in 5th edition have this ability to overcommit to an encounter in order to power through something.
Yeah.
Right. And so that whole thing of like, if you're only running a limited number of encounters, does that actually work? So how does the 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide actually address a bunch of these problems?
First and foremost, the 2024 DMG has introduced a brand new chart that details the allowance based on XP for designing combat encounters. So based on the level of your party, you take whether you want an easy, moderate, or difficult encounter, and it gives you an XP budget. You times that number by the amount of players you have at that level, and that's how much XP you have to spend. And the higher you go, it gets way more robust of a number than it ever was in 2014, which makes a lot of sense. This means that high-level play, it's saying, go ahead and throw a few dragons at your party. It's going to be okay. The numbers presented here seem, at a glance, very appropriate for what we actually expect from a game.
So here's what's interesting, is that the 2014 rules, if you look at the table that was in the 2014 DMG and the 2024 DMG, it's actually almost the same table, except just shifted by 1 spot. So the 2014 rules had easy, medium, hard, deadly. Easy is dropped from the table, and the new, like, hard is what used to be deadly. And the values are actually the same, but shifted 1 spot. In 2014, if you were building a hard encounter for 4 5th level characters, your budget would be 3,000. That's what you're doing with a moderate encounter in 2024. So the difficulty scale has shifted 1 point. But the other key change here is that there's no longer a multiplier for using multiple monsters.
It's just use whatever monsters you want.
And that was the most finicky thing about the previous set of rules. Because previously, if you were using 4 monsters, you had to multiply the XP value for calculating the difficulty of that encounter by 2.
And that I think is where the old version completely fell apart.
It's exactly where it fell apart, right? Because under the old rules, so let's go back to doing this moderate. Let's say that we wanted to do the 5th level characters example. We've got a pool of 3,000 XP. If we're doing 4 monsters.
And in the 2014, 3,000 XP is for a hard encounter.
For a hard encounter. So if we were doing 4 monsters, what we would do there is if we got challenge rating 2 monsters that are 450 XP, they would all be doubled in XP to 900. So you would end up using, if you wanted a party of 4 player characters to each fight 1 monster, you'd use you'd be basically using like something between challenge rating 2 and challenge rating 1 monsters. And that would be your XP budget. But now under 2024, that party, you're going 4 CR3 monsters.
For a moderate encounter.
For a moderate encounter.
So this is where it feels way better, is instead of 4 CR1 to 2 monsters for a hard encounter, which the players were just going to destroy.
They were going to destroy. Yeah. Yeah.
For a moderate encounter, you're facing 4 CR3 monsters, which is going to be a moderate encounter. If you want to up the difficulty a bit, you can. And
in fact, if you were stocking an encounter with CR1 monsters in 2024, you would need to use 12 CR1 monsters for a moderate encounter.
Which also means that we are in this place where it's very easy to throw in like a big monster and minions and design the encounter very easily around that. So simply by shifting everything 1 space and omitting the multiplier, that's all it really took to make a much smoother system.
Even in 2014, if you used 2 monsters, you immediately applied a ×2 multiplier. And if you used 7 to 10, it was a 2.5. And using between 3 and 6, it was a ×2 multiplier. So, like, this is going to be much more robust encounters, right? Because, again, let's go back to our example of our 5th level party. In 2014, if you wanted to use a troll, as soon as you added one other monster to that encounter, the troll's XP went from 1800 to 2700. And then whatever monster you put along, like, I would go into like any of those encounter builders and like you do 1 troll, 2 trolls was immediately deadly, right? I have seen 5th level parties destroy 2 trolls.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And so now, under 2024, 2 trolls is just above a moderate encounter, but it's not quite at the threshold for a hard encounter.
One thing that is actually missing from the 2024 rules that feels strange that they don't mention here is we still don't have an indication of how many combat encounters we are expected to use per day. Now, Monty and I have both been DMing long enough that we have settled on 3 to 5 as the magic number. But, you know, assuming that it is a new dungeon master who is watching this video or reading through the DMG, they might not know that information. You read it and sure, it gives you all the encounter building options, but at what point should you be letting your players take a rest? That feels like an important part of combat balance, of encounter balance.
Yeah, you know, there's a really interesting thing, and I actually had a call to, I think I was watching an interview with one of the Pathfinder 2 2nd Edition developers, because Pathfinder 2nd Edition actually does not have a recommendation for how many encounters to have in an adventuring day either, despite having also very robust encounter building rules, which work along a very similar premise. Maybe that is because it's just an organic thing.
It's up to the table, it's up to the DM, and it's up to the story.
Because there is one... if I'm recalling correctly, I think it was Mark Sefter. I cannot pronounce his last name. I'm so apologetic. But the one argument is, well, no, it's up to the players how far they push it. Like, if you're exploring a dungeon, it's up to the players to decide when they're burnt out of resources.
But there is also the case of the overly cautious party who takes a short rest after every encounter and then a long rest. And it's like, my general rule of thumb is no long rests in a dungeon, no long rests in an adventure, unless there's unless the adventure is broken into arcs where there's a safe space.
Yeah, I just feel like I feel like the more measuring sticks you give dungeon masters, the better. Like, because the thing is that not every adventure structure is a dungeon-based structure. Sometimes, let's think of the classic example of the party is doing the point defense, right? Like, they have to defend a location from waves of monsters. That is an important place where knowing how many waves of monsters would I expect my party to be able to survive is a handy tool to have when you're planning the encounters, or when you're trying to do maybe a overland travel scenario or something or a time-based or an event-based adventure where like the party has to do X number of tasks in one day. Well, how many encounters is too many encounters?
I do think that I understand it being organic, but, you know, even in they give a bunch of example adventures in the new DMG.
Yeah.
And in those example adventures, they detail about 4-ish combat encounters per adventure, which seems like they could have just said, we generally assume 4 combat encounters on an adventuring day. And even if they said, we generally assume, at the end of the day, it is up to the DM, but as a new DM, it would be nice to be like, oh, so I should stick in and around 4.
Maybe they didn't say that because they got skewered for the 6 to 8.
Maybe.
Yeah, I feel like that's probably why they avoided it, but it still feels like an oversight.
It does.
Yeah.
I do think, though, that it is an organic thing, and I do think that different stories are going to have different beats. Again, Once you've been DMing for a while, I generally am at the point where I know how to say no to my players. Early on, I was like, I don't know how to say no. They want to take a long rest. I guess you can in this room in the dungeon because you secured it. But at the same time, a room in the dungeon could be monitored by the other creatures inhabiting
Yeah.
that dungeon. So I now am at the point where I know when to grant a long rest and I know when to say you actually can't because it's not
Yeah.
safe here. Short rests are cool though.
So, confession time.
Yeah,
So, you know our recent arc on Fate of Drakenheim in Dransmond?
sure do.
I used these encounter building rules for that arc.
Wow. And it was intense.
Yeah.
But
It was
fair.
18th level characters.
Yeah.
But that's what I used these encounter building rules. Using, admittedly, monsters that you and I have designed, and
To be robust and scary.
yeah.
But it still worked.
Yeah.
So that's actually great because at 18th level, that's a huge testament. I don't know why this is important. 18th level is usually around the time that notoriously everybody in the D&D community complains that the whole game falls apart and it's impossible to challenge players. Not to mention, if you watch our recent arc, Monty very purposely made a environment that was hazardous and would always be
there was
danger.
Contaminated water.
We were in contaminated water.
So, like, not only was the water toxic to be in, and so the party was constantly taking damage from that, but like the underwater combat rules were in effect, and like breath and breathing was, even though everyone had water breathing like half the time.
Yeah, but still, you at 18th level, you create a deadly environment, and you use the new system placed in the 2024 DMG, and I can tell you as a player, those were very fair fights. I was concerned multiple times, and in the end, we mostly triumphed.
Yeah.
No spoilers.
Because that was, remember the encounter with the 3 Drakenheim sewer gators?
I was scared.
Yeah, that was, because like the example that they give for a party of 6 15th level characters in the DMG is 2 adult red dragons and 2 fire giants.
Which is great. That sounds terrifying.
Yeah.
Even if you're a 15th level party, that's a terrifying combat encounter.
I love the double dragon encounter, just for the record.
I love double dragon.
Nothing makes players, like, a dragon encounter is great, but like, what if there were 2 dragons? It usually terrifies players. The idea
throwing 2 dragons at your party is terrifying no matter what. And if you throw 2 giants in there, that's actually a testament to say that like it actually is working pretty well, even at 18th level play. Again, there is the nuance of, I think that as soon as you pass the 10th level margin, you should always be looking for how does the environment affect this combat encounter? And the answer should be there's always something at play beyond just hitting things with weapons and spells. Whether that's in the caldera of a volcano or a room that has spouts of poisonous gas or underwater and contaminated water. There's always something that you can add that makes it more of a robust combat.
Yeah.
But this is less about designing combat, although it is about designing combat, but the rules work.
No, and I want to like give some more examples. So like I'm just grabbing D&D Beyond here because it's got the D&D Beyond has the encounter builder for the old rules up on there. And I would expect that they'll probably have a new encounter builder very soon that uses the new rules. But like, to give an example of like the party of 5 characters, right? Let's do like the basic Hobgoblin encounter, right? So if you grab like the Hobgoblin Devastator, which is the Hobgoblin Mage, and the Hobgoblin Captain.
The Hobgoblin Veteran.
Yeah. So that becomes a challenge. Like that has the adjusted XP threshold of 2,700 under the old rules. That's your medium encounter right there. And as soon as you add, like you fill
3
this encounter
more hobgoblins
out and add 3 more hobgoblins into it, it's now considered by the rules. It has a total adjusted.
How many
budget.
hobgoblins did you add in?
I added 6 hobgoblins.
Which is still, that feels like a war band of hobgoblins.
I have run this encounter.
Yeah.
And this encounter, it is adjusted to 6,000 XP. I've run this actually with this very same encounter. I'm actually going to do it. I've run it with 8 hobgoblins before, and that is considered a deadly encounter. And I can tell you, having run this encounter, it is not a it's a good encounter, but it's not deadly.
No, so you have the
Right.
Devastator, the Veteran, and 8 Hobgoblins.
Yeah.
Hobgoblins go down pretty darn quick. They
Yeah.
die to,
Yeah.
like, does your wizard have Fireball? Okay.
Under the new encounter building rules, this combat, so 1100 for the Devastator, 700 for the Hobgoblin Sergeant, that's 1800 XP. I could have 12 Hobgoblins in there.
Yeah.
And I still have and actually what you could do if you really wanted to is you could actually have 2 of those Hobgoblin captains and still add like 5 or 6 Hobgoblins, and that's going to be still a moderate encounter under the new rules.
To summarize all of this, I think that it's clear that the 2024 DMG probably, the reason why we're doing this video is because, in our opinion, the greatest achievement of the 2024 DMG is that this system is going to work so much better.
There's no multiplication.
No multiplication. It's straightforward. It's easy to use. And you're going to have more robust combat encounters. This is under the assumption, again, we haven't seen the monster manual yet, but right now we're using what's available on D&D Beyond, and it still seems good. The fact that Monty has used this system in our game is a good sign as well.
Yeah.
So I think that overall, one of the greatest achievements of this book is this new system. A few small changes make all the difference, and now suddenly CR doesn't feel as broken anymore.
No, I mean, it remains to be seen. My suspicion is that the new monsters are going to be more glass cannon. Because one of the things that I always like to think of for myself, and this is maybe an important behind the scenes thing. So in talking with the designers of D&D, I know that they are thinking about combat encounters that last between 3 and 5 rounds.
I mean, to me, that's the sweet spot.
And that's that is the one other detail that I kind of think should have been in the DMG.
How long?
How long should your combat encounter be in rounds? Right? Because I think that there are dungeon masters out there that either think that an encounter needs to be like 10 rounds.
Oh no.
No.
That's boring.
No.
That's your whole night of D&D in one combat.
And I would
encounter.
even say for a climactic boss battle at the end of the campaign,
5 or 6.
I don't even like, I think I would say for myself, like if you're running a combat encounter and it's taken you 10 rounds to resolve it, something is off and something needs to be reevaluated there. On the other side, like barring crazy explosive dice rolls, I want a combat encounter to last at least 3 rounds.
And I want to go back then to the glass cannons and why that actually feels valuable. So glass cannon monsters, if you're not familiar with the term glass cannon, it's the idea cannons shoot really, really hard, but glass breaks really, really easily. So it's a monster that hits really hard, but has pretty weak defenses. This actually is going to work because it means that combat encounters, which I'm not going to lie, are the biggest slog in D&D.
Yeah.
Combat encounters take up 5 times the amount of time as exploration and social, for the same amount of payoff. So combat encounters are exciting, but we can get straight to the action. Monsters are hitting harder. Player characters are hitting harder. Monsters are going to die faster. Player characters are going to be taking a lot more damage though. So in your 3 to 5 rounds, which is what they're aiming for, yeah, you can sweep out all of the monsters in 3 rounds, but they're going to be hitting like a truck every single turn. Yeah. So it ends up, I think, creating a very exciting and action-oriented combat encounter. And I think that's what we're aiming for with D&D.
Yeah. I mean, it does, the new rules do warn you, and they have some guidelines here. I do think that these are probably much, much better guidelines. The other kind of things that I like is that it does encourage you to say, like, you know, be aware of if you're using a monster that is a vastly higher challenge rating than the party. So a very clear example of this is that actually a challenge rating 7 monster fits into the XP budget for a moderate encounter for level 5 characters. In fact, a challenge rating 8 monster can actually fit into the hard budget too. So you can actually have a difficult encounter with a monster that is a much higher challenge rating than the party, but the DMG warns you, careful, Because as soon as you start to get too high above the party, it could have abilities that will just crush them. Like, it could have enough damage to one-shot them.
It's better, I think, if you have the budget, to pick a monster that fits in the budget while leaving room for a few weak little minions.
Yeah, and then on the other side, it also recommends don't use too many different stat blocks, because it actually literally says, like, if you're using, it's like, it says the best combat encounter often pairs one kind of creature with another, but be mindful of how many stat blocks, because if you have to reference more than 2 or 3 stat blocks, that can be hard for you.
And we've both experienced that. It's better to have 18 goblins and a bugbear than it is to have the bugbear, a bunch of goblins. They have pet wolves. They have a troll. They have a cave troll. And they're paired with some orcs. At that point, you have way too much to manage. It's better to just pick 2, maybe 3. My general rule of 3 is you get the leader, the spellcaster, and the minions.
Yeah. And I agree. I think that is great. Like, and I think the minions is actually a really salient point, because I like that the budget now makes it pretty easy to pick like 2 sort of anchor monsters for your encounter and backfill it with minions that are of appropriate challenge.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like these rules. I've been using them, as I said, in some of our games. I'm going to continue to use them. I think they work really, really well. They're the fastest and the easiest to use. And honestly, this XP table, this XP budget thing, feels like a thing that you can just pin to your DMG.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So this is probably our favorite part of the DMG. We'd love to know your thoughts on it, and if you've been using it at your table. We also want to know if there's other parts of the DMG that you want us to do a deeper dive into. Let us know in the comments below.
The videos that we make on our channel are made possible thanks to the incredible generosity of our Patreon supporters. If you enjoy the work that we do here, please consider supporting the channel on Patreon. The links are down below.
And if you want to see some great high-level D&D that actually is difficult and challenging for the players, I can attest to that, you can check out our actual play in the Worlds of Drakenheim, which airs Tuesday evenings right here on YouTube. You can check out all the previous episodes right up over here.
And we got plenty more coverage on the new 2024 rulebooks right up over here.
Please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and ring that bell so that you never miss an episode.
Thanks so much for watching. See you next time
in the dungeon.